I'm Scott from New Zealand Fishing World, and today I'm here with Marcus Church from Rod and Reel in Newmarket. And Marcus is an absolute expert in slow pitch jigging, and today we're going to have a look at some advanced techniques on how to use them, a little bit of next level stuff, because there is a real technique that is the difference between catching 10 fish and catching 2 fish. So Marcus, over to you, mate. Give us the secrets.
Thanks, Scott. You've probably seen and read and maybe even heard about slow pitch jigs. There's quite a few different types on the market. They all kind of have their own specific actions to them, and essentially these type of jigs are designed to flutter and slide and really move around and give off a lot of vibration and flash as they work. But how do we work them? And that's kind of the key. Like, we see this type of stuff, but how do we actually get it to do what it's designed to do? Well, with these type of jigs, I'm going to show you. The rods are designed to impart a lot of the action into the jigs, and they're designed to recover quite quickly. And there's kind of a few techniques that we'll go through today that will help you with regards to kind of catching more of these fish. So what we're going to look at is the whole pitch idea is to do with the turn of your handle. So there's quarter pitch, half pitch and full pitch. And that just means quarter turn, half turn and full turn on the handle of your reel. So that's just essentially picking up line once you've worked your jig. So what we do is we give it a short punch of the rod, and you'll see the rod will essentially load up when I give it that short punch, and then it flicks back up, and that's what brings that jig up. So I'll give it a short punch and I'll just give it a half turn, and then I'll pause. And I'll give it a short punch and I'll give it a half turn and then pause. And the reason for that pause, and I kind of emphasize on that, is because that's often when you'll get your take. So you don't get your fish hitting them that often when you actually work the jig. You might go to lift your rod and give it that punch and a fish is there, and that's because it's been paused. And the reason for that is, as that jig shoots off, that attracts the fish and they can see it, but usually they can't actually jump on it. Whereas when you pause it, that's when they get that opportunity to come in and grab it. Sometimes it's an aggressive hit, sometimes it's a subtle little tap, and we'll go through some of that, you know, how to change up your techniques depending on what that is. So that's your kind of more traditional slow pitch technique. The next technique we'd look at is called high pitch, which essentially means we're going to lift the rod a lot higher, which means the jig's going to come up a lot higher, but also it's going to mean that that jig can really flutter and slide as it comes down. So a high pitch is simply nice and high, drop that rod tip, and then half a turn of your handle, or a quarter, or full, as we've talked about, depending on how much of the water column you want to work through. So it's punch it up, drop it down, and you can see by how high that rod goes and comes down how much we're talking about that jig working in an area. So the first technique, that more traditional slow pitch, we're talking, you know, this much kind of an area, and you're stepping up in that as you go. Whereas the next technique, we're talking kind of 3 or 4 feet. What that does is it means it gives off a lot more vibration and a lot more flash, because that jig works in a bigger area, which also means that fish can see it and essentially feel it from the vibration from a wider area. So mix it up is the key to this type of stuff. If you work the slow pitch technique and you're in, say, a workup condition, you can actually make the jig work quite quick. Your pauses can be a lot shorter because you've got fish all competing at once, so they'll aggressively come in and hit that jig. But if we're not in that type of situation, which is, you know, kind of 90% of the time, and we're just out over structure or over open ground, and we're reading our sounder and we're looking for sign, that's when we'll slow it down. So if the fish aren't actively feeding and they're not up off the bottom and they're not hitting your jigs and they're just tapping them, what we find is we slow things down a lot more, give the fish more time to get onto your jigs and more time to come in and tap them. If you are getting tapped but you're not getting those hookups, leave it in that zone a lot longer. So stay on that short traditional slow pitch technique, because then you're not pulling it away from them very quickly. If you go to that kind of high pitch technique in that situation, what can happen is you pull that jig a long way away from the fish, and the fish can become disinterested and move away. So snapper traditionally won't do a lot of work to take your jig if they can help it. So they're going to do as little effort as they can to get as good a food source as they can. So that's why we try and make these things look like an injured baitfish. So we've talked about the technique. What we're going to look at is the jigs. Jigs that have a real wide shape to them and are thin are going to slide a lot more and take a lot longer to get down. This one, which is a lot denser, the weight's a lot more distributed to the center, it's going to get down a lot faster. So on days when you're drifting quick, there's a lot of wind, you've got stronger currents, these are the jigs you pull out because they'll get down fast. So rigging these things, you'll see most of them will come with what's called a double hook rig. So you'll see these on in Chiku skirts and things, but these ones are a little bit different. So the idea behind these ones is that in this Kevlar cord that is essentially attaching them is actually a fluorocarbon inside it. The reason for that is it keeps them a lot stiffer, so you can actually see these stay quite stiff. And the reason to keep them stiff is so that when a fish comes in to hit the jig, they're not all soft and fold out of the way. They stay in their place. 2 hooks rather than 1. Reason for that is essentially double your chances of hooking a fish. Where to put the hook? Usually most jigs give you an idea is that the eye on that jig will be the end that you'll attach to and put those hooks on. And essentially always tie your leader through the solid ring that's attaching your hooks. That way whenever you're hooked to a fish, you're always directly in contact with your hooks. And secondly, if you ever want to change that jig, you can just change the jig on and off with a split ring and you never have to cut your leader. So it makes things a lot faster and a lot more efficient. From here on in, it's up to you guys. Go out there and give it a go. If you haven't tried it, I would definitely recommend it. We find this technique is absolutely deadly.